Chester wasn't like other pigs. For 3 days, he dug in the same spot on Ethan Callaway's Wyoming ranch, not rooting for food, but with a fierce, almost human desperation. Ethan, a weathered rancher who'd spent his life reading the land, had never seen an animal act this way. The hole grew deeper, the dirt darker, and Chester's grunts turned into something unnatural, like he was digging for more than scraps, like he knew what lay beneath. And when Ethan finally looked inside, he wished he hadn't. The pit Chester carved was too perfect. 4 feet wide, steep sides, as if drawn by invisible hands. Ethan's late wife, Lillian, used to say animals sense things people couldn't. Now, standing at the edge, he believed her. The soil here was looser, wrong, like it had been turned before. With a shovel in hand, Ethan struck something soft yet unyielding. Faded blue fabric, a ribcage, and clutched in the bone's grip, a tarnished star. Sheriff Marcus Webb, missing since 1923, buried on his land. Ethan's hands shook as he pulled his grandfather's journal from the attic. Jonas Callaway, the man who'd built this ranch. The entry dated September 15, 1923, was brief. The Webb matter is settled. Bought the Morrison plot today. Below it, a faded photograph. Jonas, a young deputy named Theodore Pike, and Sheriff Webb, wearing the same blue shirt now wrapped around bones. Ethan's stomach turned. The ranch's expansion, the family's wealth, all paid for with blood money. And Chester? He'd been digging for justice. It wasn't a squeal or a grunt. It was a low, broken wail, the sound of grief. Chester stood over the grave, staring at Ethan with eyes too knowing, too old. The other animals had gone silent. Even the wind stilled. In that moment, Ethan felt it. The weight of a century of silence. Sheriff Webb hadn't just been buried. He'd been forgotten. And Chester, this stubborn, loyal pig, had refused to let him stay that way. The sound hung in the air, a plea Ethan couldn't ignore. The deeper Ethan dug, the colder his hands grew. Beneath Webb's ribs, a rotted leather pouch. Inside, brittle papers and a map of Carbon County, marked with 6 red X's. "Burial sites," whispered Martha Kellerman, the local historian, her voice trembling. Each X matched where ranchers had found unidentified bones over the years, dismissed as old settlers. But Webb's notes told the truth. A cattle-rustling ring, protected by lawmen. And at the center, Jonas Callaway and Deputy Pike. The ranch wasn't just built on one murder, but many. Ethan rubbed the badge clean. Marcus Webb, 1923. The same year Jonas suddenly had cash to buy land. The same year the sheriff vanished. In the photograph, Webb stood apart from the others, his posture rigid, his jaw set. A man about to make an arrest. But someone had stopped him. Ethan's breath caught. That blue shirt in the grave, identical to the one in the photo. Chester hadn't just found a body. He'd uncovered the moment Jonas chose murder over honor, and doomed his family to carry the secret. September 14, 1923. Sheriff Webb's final report, never sent, named Jonas and Pike as conspirators in a cattle theft ring stretching to Cheyenne. September 15th. Webb disappeared. September 16th. Jonas bought the Morrison plot with $10,000 in cash. A fortune then. Ethan's chest ached. His grandfather hadn't just killed a man. He'd stolen his future. No grave, no justice, just a quiet plot of land, and a pig, a century later, who'd remembered. Chester nosed the badge gently, as if saying, "See? I told you." The album's spine cracked like old bones. There, between smiling family portraits, a group shot, Jonas, Pike, and men Ethan didn't recognize. Cattle barons, railroad tycoons, all wealthy after 1923, all on Webb's list. Their descendants, the current mayor, the police chief, people who'd built empires on Webb's grave. Ethan's fingers traced Pike's face. the same sharp chin as Chief Raymond Pike, who'd pulled him over for speeding last week. The ink was faded but the rage fresh. Territorial Governor Davis is involved. Meet me at Medicine Bow Depot. I've proof. Webb had planned to arrest Jonas and Pike at dawn. Instead, he'd ended up in a hole on the Calloway Ranch. Ethan's vision blurred. Lillian's voice echoed. Truth has roots, Ethan. Dig deep enough, you'll find him. Now he understood. Chester had dug for Webb, but also for him, for the chance to cut the rot from his family's legacy. The question was, would he take it? The ledger's pages crackled like fire. $5,000 from Pike. $15,000 from the railroad. All dated after Webb vanished. Jonas hadn't just killed a sheriff. He'd sold the silence. Ethan's ranch, his inheritance, his name, all bought with blood. Outside, Chester lay by the grave, watching, waiting. The pig had done his part. Now it was Ethan's turn. He reached for the phone, then stopped. Chief Pike's black truck was idling at the gate. They knew, and they wouldn't let the past be dug up without a fight. Ethan's fingers trembled as he unfolded the brittle map. 6 red X's scarred Carbon County, hole in the wall, Fort Fred Steele, Bates Battlefield, each labeled with dates and numbers. Body counts. Martha's voice cracked as she traced them. They disappeared, just like Webb. The X over his ranch pulsed like a wound. Chester nudged his boot, as if saying, "You're not done digging yet, because if Webb was here, who lay beneath those other marks? And why had no one looked for them?" The dates told the story. 1923 to 1925. 2 years of killings. Ranchers, lawmen, a journalist from Cheyenne, all silenced for getting too close. Martha slid a newspaper clipping across the table. Sheriff Pike elected, 1926. The same Pike who'd helped bury Webb. The same family now running the county. Ethan's coffee turned to acid in his throat. Chester's discovery wasn't just about the past. It was a live wire to today. And the people who'd built their power on those graves, they'd kill to keep them hidden. Martha's knuckles whitened around her teacup. 3 researchers tried this, she murmured. 1 accident. 1 vanished. 1 fled in the night. Outside, an engine idled Chief Pike's truck circling the Historical Society. Ethan's skin prickled. Chester had led him to the truth. But now, he was standing on a rattlesnake. Martha pressed Webb's diary into his hands. Burn it or fight, but choose fast. The pages smelled of old blood and gunpowder. And in the margins, a name that froze him, Calloway's price. $10,000 and the Morrison deed. Headlights stalked Ethan's rearview mirror all the way to the ranch. Pike didn't even hide it. The message was clear. Stop digging. But Chester waited at the gate, snout caked in dirt, still working. The pig led him to the old barn, pawing at loose floorboards. Beneath them, a rusted strongbox. Inside, bundles of 1920s cash and a note in Jonas's hand. For the Webb job. T.P. Ethan's knees buckled. Proof. But proof meant war with men who'd already killed to keep it buried. The growl started low. A vibration Ethan felt more than heard. Chester stood rigid, staring into the dark beyond the porch. Then came the crunch of gravel. Pike's voice slithered through the night. Evening, Calloway. Found something interesting. Ethan's hand closed around Webb's badge in his pocket. Chester bared his teeth, a sound like ripping metal in his throat. For a heartbeat, Pike hesitated. Animals knew evil. And this pig, he'd been digging up the past. But he'd fight for the future. Pike's flashlight carved shadows across the porch. 2 more men lurked behind him. Ranch hands? Deputies? Ethan's pulse hammered. Funny? Pike drawled. How that pig just knew where to dig. Chester butted against Ethan's leg, warm and solid. Alive. Unlike Webb. Unlike the others. Ethan straightened. You here to arrest me, Chief? Or finish what your granddaddy started? Pike's smile didn't reach his eyes. We're just talking, for now. But as his truck retreated, Ethan didn't sleep. At dawn, he drove to Medicine Bow, where Webb's last letter begged for backup. The payphone swallowed his quarters as he recited the list. Pike, Davis, Morrison. The FBI agent on the line went silent. You're describing a territorial conspiracy that never died. Ethan watched the horizon. Pike's men would come, but so would the feds. And Chester? He'd already done his part. As the call ended, Ethan whispered, Webb, it's done. The wind carried it away, like 100 years of ghosts exhaling. The raid made headlines. Feds arrest police chief in century-old murder cover-up. Pike screamed about family legacy as they dragged him out. But Ethan? He stood with Chester at the grave, Webb's badge catching the sun. They'll say Jonas was a monster, he told the pig. But he was just a man who chose wrong. Chester grunted, nosing the fresh earth. A real burial this time. No secrets, no shame. Just the truth finally standing in the light. And the stubborn pig who dug it up. The stone read, Sheriff Marcus Webb, died for duty, found by justice. Ethan left a replica badge at the base, one for Webb, one for Chester. The pig dozed in the shade, his work done. Tourists would come. Reporters would gawk. But today, just an old rancher and the wind through the sagebrush, carrying whispers even Chester couldn't dig up. Rest easy, Sheriff, Ethan murmured. Somewhere he swore he heard it, that same mournful sound Chester had made. Only this time, it sounded like peace. The vet said pigs don't live forever. But when Chester went, he took a piece of history with him, buried with that replica badge right beside Webb. The townsfolk left flowers. Kids rubbed his bronze snout for luck. And Ethan? He'd sit on the porch at dusk, listening. For a grunt. For the scrape of hooves. For the sound of something digging in the dreams of guilty men. Because legends don't die. They just wait for the next soul brave enough to unearth them. Ethan walked the fence line where the old Morrison plot met Callaway land, ground bought with blood money. The grass grew greener here, fed by something darker than rain. Chester trotted beside him, snout testing the wind like he could still smell the crime. That fancy new barn? Built right over Webb's original grave. The iron nails in those timbers had rust the color of old blood. Every board creaked the same truth. This whole ranch was a memorial to murder, and only 2 living souls knew it. Ethan walked the fence line where the old Morrison plot met Callaway land, ground bought with blood money. The grass grew greener here, fed by something darker than rain. Chester trotted beside him, snout testing the wind like he could still smell the crime. That fancy new barn? Built right over Webb's original grave. The iron nails in those timbers had rust the color of old blood. Every board creaked the same truth. This whole ranch was a memorial to murder, and only 2 living souls knew it. Chester's gaze held Ethan across the twilight. Not an animal's stare, something older. Like the pig had seen this story before. Like he'd waited for Ethan to join him. The wind carried the scent of Lillian's roses from her long-dead garden. She'd always said, animals remember what people try to forget. Now Chester blinked slow as if to say, took you long enough. For the first time, Ethan wondered, had this stubborn pig been here before too? In another life, another name? The thought made the Wyoming night feel colder than it should. Midnight, the herd usually milled and nickered. Tonight, statues. Ears pricked toward the barn where Chester pawed at shadows. Ethan's flashlight caught their eyes wide, white-rimmed. Spooked. Then he heard it, a cough that wasn't animal. From the loft where Webb's evidence hid. The horses knew, just like they'd known 100 years ago when Jonas dragged something heavy through this same pasture. Chester let out a warning grunt. Whatever shared the dark with them, it wasn't alive. Not anymore. The ledger's spine cracked like a gunshot. Page after page of bribes, threats, and blood. $50 to the coroner. $200 to the newspaper editor. All to keep Webb's disappearance quiet. But one entry made Ethan's breath stop. Asterisk freight car number 1187 Medicine Bow Depot. Special delivery for TP. Asterisk the same depot Webb had named in his last letter. The same night he vanished. Outside, Chester dug at the roots of the old cottonwood, where the earth was soft as fresh dough. Ethan didn't need to look to know what the pig would find next. The crooked post near the grave leaned like a tired old man. Its wood was split where bullet holes had healed over. Ethan ran his fingers over the scars, Jonas's .45 caliber. Target practice? Or something darker? Chester sniffed the base, uncovering a tarnished shell casing. 1923. The post had seen it all. The murder, the burial, the lies. Now it watched Ethan decide. Bury the truth again? Or let it stand tall like the splintered sentinel? The wind whistled through the cracks. Almost like words. Almost like choose. The Carbon County Cemetery held no stone for Marcus Webb. But Ethan found the empty plot where it should have been, between two war heroes, paid for by the town in 1922. Reserved for our sheriff. Weeds choked the space now. Chester rooted at the edges, unearthing a single tarnished cufflink. Webb's initials still visible. Someone had removed his body, but not his right to rest here. Ethan knelt, brushing dirt from the forgotten marker. "We'll fix this," he whispered. Above them a hawk circled, watching, waiting, like justice itself. The tracks near Medicine Bow still carried freights at night, the same lonesome whistle that had covered sinister cargo in 1923. Ethan stood where Webb's last letter promised proof would arrive. Chester nosed the gravel, uncovering a rusted railroad spike and a human molar. The pieces fit. Jonas and Pike had loaded Webb's body onto a cattle car, but something or someone had fallen out here. The wind carried the scent of coal and sage, and beneath it, the metallic tang of old blood on old iron. Martha's hands shook as she unfolded the 1918 Carbon County Gazette. The headline, "New Sheriff Webb Vows to Clean Up Corruption." Below it, a photo of a young Marcus, idealistic, grinning. "They killed him 5 years later," she whispered. Chester nudged her knee, leaving dirt on her floral dress. She didn't brush it off. The pig understood what Ethan was just realizing. Martha had known Webb, maybe even loved him. Her tears fell on the newsprint, blurring the date, September 14th, 1923. The day before he vanished. The day before everything changed. Exhaustion weighed Ethan's bones. But Chester butted his palm warm, insistent, then trotted toward the barn. The pig paused, looking back like Lillian used to when she knew he was quitting too soon. Inside that barn? Answers. More pain. Maybe both. Ethan's boots dragged through dust that hadn't settled in 100 years. Chester waited by the strongbox, snout lifted. "All right, boy," Ethan sighed. "Let's see what else Grandpa hid." The lock gave way with a scream of rust, and the past spilled out like a wound finally bleeding clean. The rusted hinges shrieked like a wounded animal. Inside, bundles of 1920s banknotes, still crisp as the day they were blood-stained, lay atop a yellowed envelope. Ethan's breath caught at the return address. Territorial Governor's Office, Cheyenne. Chester nudged his knee, wet snout leaving a mark on his jeans. The pig's eyes reflected the fading light as Ethan pulled out a single page. 3 words leaped out. "Webb must disappear." Signed with a flourish Ethan recognized from every land deed in his safe. His grandfather's handwriting. The trunk smelled of camphor and shame. Beneath Lillian's wedding quilt lay a broad-brimmed Stetson, its leather band cracked with age. Ethan turned it slowly. There, inside the crown, a dark stain no amount of brushing could lift. Chester whuffed softly from the attic stairs. He'd led Ethan here, just as he'd led him to the grave. The hat fit Ethan's head perfectly. Too perfectly, like it had been waiting. Outside, the wind howled through the cottonwoods, carrying whispers of the last man who'd worn it before he was buried in a pig pen. The fireplace had hidden secrets for a century. Ethan's fingers found the loose brick Chester had been nosing at for weeks. Behind it, a scrap of paper, Lillian's delicate script, "Lord, forgive Jonas for what he—" The rest was torn away. Chester leaned against Ethan's leg, warm and solid as the truth he'd uncovered. His wife had known. Maybe not everything, but enough to plead for mercy her husband hadn't deserved. The paper crumbled at the edges like Ethan's voice when he whispered, "Oh, Lily, why didn't you tell me?" Chester's latest hole wasn't near the grave. It was under Lillian's rosebush, the one she'd planted their first spring. The pig's snout emerged cradling a tiny glass vial. Perfume? Medicine? Ethan uncorked it carefully. The scent hit him like a freight train. Lavender and lemongrass. Lillian's signature blend. His knees hit the dirt. Chester nuzzled his shoulder, grunting softly. The pig hadn't just been digging for Webb's justice. He'd been digging for Lillian's secrets too. And now Ethan held proof. She'd known more than she could bear. The faces in the oval frames watched without blinking. Jonas with his rifle. Samuel at the cattle auction. Generations of Calloway men who'd built this empire on lies. Ethan wiped dust from the glass only to freeze. There, in the background of a 1940s photo, stood a familiar figure. A tall ranch hand with Webb's sharp cheekbones. The label read J. Smith, hired help. But those eyes, Chester snorted at the image, pawing the floor. The message was clear. The dead don't stay buried. And sometimes they come back to watch. The newspaper headline screamed, "Pike resigns amid scandal." Below it, Chief Raymond's mugshot. Eyes hollow, dynasty crumbling. Ethan traced the print with a calloused finger. Chester dozed at his feet, belly full for the first time in weeks. The pig had outlasted them all. Outside, wind chimes Lillian had hung tinkled like ghostly applause. The last pike was gone, but the Calloways remained. Ethan folded the paper carefully, tucking it behind Webb's badge on the mantel. "Not clean," he told Chester, "but closer." The pig's answering grunt sounded almost like forgiveness. Iron gates creaked on new hinges. The Marcus Webb Memorial stood bright under Wyoming sun. Fresh sod covering what Chester had uncovered. Ethan ran a hand over the engraved stone. A good man who stood alone. Behind him, tourists snapped photos. Schoolchildren placed wildflowers. And Chester? He lounged in the shade, belly rising and falling in contentment. The wind carried voices from the past, some angry, some relieved. But one whisper cut through, "Thank you," whether it came from Webb's ghost or Ethan's conscience. Even Chester couldn't say. The vet said 14 was ancient for a pig. They laid Chester to rest beside Webb's memorial, the replica badge shining on his collar. Ethan's tears fell into the dirt as he shoveled. Not the frantic digging of discovery, but the slow, sure strokes of closure. That night, alone on the porch, he heard it. A familiar grunt from the pasture. When he turned, nothing stirred, except maybe the wind, or the past, or something in between. Ethan raised his whiskey. "Good pig," he murmured. Somewhere, a satisfied snort seemed to answer. The Morrison plot didn't grow alfalfa anymore. Now it bore white crosses and wildflowers, one for each X on Webb's map. Ethan tended them daily, Chester's old trough repurposed as a watering can. Tourists asked why he'd turned good grazing land into a memorial. He'd just point to the plaque. Some crops feed the stomach, others feed the soul. Sometimes at dusk, shadows stretched long from the crosses, almost like men standing tall again. And sometimes, if the wind was right, Ethan swore he heard contented grunting from beyond the fence. The rocking chair groaned as Ethan settled in. Older now, hair gone white, with a grandchild on his knee. "Tell about the pig again, Grandpa." He'd start slow. Chester wasn't just any hog. Outside, dusk painted the memorial in gold. Somewhere out there, hooves might be pawing at dirt no one had turned in years. Secrets didn't stay buried forever. Not in Wyoming. Not where the wind remembered every sin, and sometimes sent a stubborn old soul to dig them up. Ethan winked at the child. "Now, where did we leave off?" The pocket watch from Jonas's desk was frozen at 2:15, its hands clutching the hour like a last breath. Ethan held it to his ear. No ticking, just the whisper of Wyoming wind through the curtains. Chester had unearthed it near the grave, its chain tangled with a human tooth. The coroner's report from 1923 was clear. Webb had been shot around midnight. But 2:15 a.m.? That was when Jonas had scrawled "It's done" in his ledger. The watch hadn't stopped. It had been stopped. And now it ticked again in Ethan's palm. The cottonwood by the creek was hollow with age, its roots cradling secrets. Ethan ran his hand over the scarred bark. Bullet wounds healed into knots. Chester rooted at its base, exposing faded boot leather and a rusted spur. This was where Jonas had parked his wagon that night, where the tree had drunk blood instead of rainwater. Its leaves trembled now, though the air was still. Ethan pressed his forehead to the trunk. Some things grew tall to reach the sun, others to bear witness for those who couldn't. The tree sighed, scattering acorns like tears. Emily's fingers traced Webb's memorial plaque, her innocence curdling in the summer heat. Grandpa, did he mean to do it? Ethan watched Chester's grave beyond the fence, where daisies nodded in the breeze. How did you explain evil to a child? He chose the ranch's oldest truth. Some men get so hungry for land, they forget to feed their soul. Emily considered this, then laid her doll beside Chester's marker. "I'd share my lunch," she declared, and in that moment, Ethan saw a new crop growing. One even Jonas couldn't poison. The shovel's thunk against the handmade coffin echoed through the pines. Martha Kellerman, 98 years old and sharper than barbed wire, scattered the first dirt onto Webb's real grave. "Took you long enough, Marcus?" she chuckled wetly. Ethan added his handful, remembering Chester's insistent snout. The pig had dug up the truth. But this was planting justice. As the minister read psalms, a familiar grunt carried from the woods. Emily gasped. "Was that?" Ethan squeezed her shoulder. Some stories didn't need endings, just new ears to hear them. The courthouse vault reeked of mildew and regret. The 1923 deed to the Morrison plot shimmered under Ethan's flashlight, signed by Pike, witnessed by Jonas. But the line that stopped his heart? Purchased from the estate of M. Webb. Marcus had owned this land before he died. They'd stolen it from a dead man. Chester would have loved the irony. Outside, thunder rolled like a gavel strike. Ethan left the deed on the archivist's desk, weighted with Webb's badge. Let the historians call it proof. He knew better. It was a receipt for murder. The turkey steamed between Jonas's empty chair and Lillian's untouched setting. Emily's small voice pierced the silence. "Grandpa, should we invite Sheriff Webb too?" Ethan's knife stilled. Through the window, the memorial's gate swung gently. No wind to move it. He set an extra plate. "Pass the potatoes to our guest," he murmured. The chair didn't creak. No fork lifted. But when Emily giggled at nothing, Ethan knew. Some debts couldn't be repaid, only acknowledged. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Chester's trough, now a planter, overflowed with late-season roses. Yellowed newspapers lined Martha's coffin, every headline since 1923 screaming about Webb's disappearance. The mourners whispered as Ethan arranged the final edition. "Pig digs up century-old conspiracy." Chester would have hated the photo. His good side was the left. But he'd have loved the subhead. Animal outlives corrupt dynasty. The wind snatched the clipping, carrying it toward the memorial. Martha would have cackled. Instead, her tombstone kept quiet company with Webb's. Two witnesses to history, finally at rest. Ethan left an apple core between them, for the pig who'd brought them home. Emily's small hands pressed the seed into earth near Chester's grave. "Amen," she whispered. More farm kid than preacher. The lavender sprouted by summer. It sent twining with Lillian's roses. Ethan watched the bees work, remembering his wife's unfinished prayer. Maybe some blessings needed roots before words. A grunt startled him. Not from the past, but Emily's new potbelly pig, Chester too, rooting proudly at his feet. The cycle wasn't broken, just softened, like calluses, like old men, like Wyoming soil after a long winter, ready to grow something new. The auctioneer's hammer fell on the Callaway Ranch, sold to a young couple planting organic wheat. Ethan kept 5 acres, the memorial, the graves, and Chester's favorite oak. As the new owners gushed about untouched land, he bit his tongue. Nothing here was untouched, just forgiven. That night, he drank whiskey under stars Webb had last seen mid-chase. The deed in his pocket bore a fresh line, in perpetual care of Marcus Webb's legacy. Some crops took generations to ripen. This one, it had needed a century and one stubborn pig. The porch swing creaked as Emily read to Chester too, her voice weaving through fireflies. Once there was a pig who remembered what everyone forgot. Ethan closed his eyes. The wind carried echoes, hooves pawing dirt, a man's grateful sigh, Lillian's lavender laugh. History wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral circling back when least expected. Somewhere beyond the fence, a shovel stood ready in fresh soil. And underneath, maybe nothing, maybe everything. Emily turned the page. The story wasn't over. It was just waiting for the next curious soul to dig deeper.